Hello everyone, welcome back to the Zach F1 channel, and this is my summary of my F1 fantasy thoughts after Friday's sessions of free practice 1 and the sprint qualifying, because like usual with a sprint race weekend we haven't actually got to the team deadline yet and we've been able to see sprint qualifying. So I will run you through the summaries I have made. So this video is for anyone who can't make it to that stream because of obviously different time zones, or they just don't want to wake up for 9 o'clock to watch any F1 fantasy videos. But let's get straight into it. So the first thing we need to talk about is Ferrari really struggling, and they're not really a good pick for a constructor anymore. Now, I've always been keen on saying that the top 4 constructors will all score similar points, so it doesn't really matter who you have, and that means you can have a second premium driver. But at this point, the gap between, and we saw it happen in Spain, but I didn't think that would happen as much, but in a sprint race weekend especially, we could have a massive gap between Red Bull and Ferrari, and so having Ferrari doesn't actually make sense anymore. So if you can afford to have McLaren, Mercedes, I'd recommend doing that with Norris. However, if you can't afford to have Norris plus McLaren and Mercedes, I would actually recommend going back to a single premium driver build, having Norris with Red Bull and Mercedes, or Norris with Red Bull and McLaren, depending on how many free transfers you have left. But then saying that about Ferrari, one of their drivers, Leclerc, actually is a decent shout, but it's in a weird way. So if you have Leclerc in your team, the way I would do it, he's starting 10th, so he's starting a little bit further down than he should be. So in the sprint race, you get quite a few less points. There's only points from 1st to 8th in the positions. However, you've still got your overtake points. So I could see Leclerc overtaking up to 7th or 6th, getting a few points. However, for the rest of the weekend, he'd probably be pretty rubbish. So then you could final fix to the likes of Hamilton or Piastri for the later races. You do have to hope that Leclerc has a good sprint race. However, if you don't want to do that, you've also, like I said, got Piastri or Hamilton who look like much better options. But then on pure pace, you still have Mercedes and McLaren looking like the best options for constructors. Obviously, Red Bull needs to be spoken about in different terms, as they will still get the most amount of points because of Max Verstappen probably winning the race and getting the fastest pit stops, which is about 18 points, on top of whatever they get around 50 to 60 points, potentially more in a race weekend like this. So yes, Mercedes, McLaren do look the strongest normally. However, Red Bull still the top dog, I think, as a constructor right now. And then premium driver wise, I would genuinely say the only options to steer clear of are Perez and Sainz. Sainz doesn't look like he's going anywhere in that Ferrari. Perez the same. I'd be happy if he just stuck in 7th. Zhou looks like the best cheap driver option at the minute, obviously qualifying 20th. If he can carry on qualifying 20th throughout this race weekend, because in the sprint race you'll only get points from 1st to 8th. A lot of the points from the smaller drivers, like the cheaper drivers, will be from overtakes. So with Zhou, if he doesn't crash out and he makes up a few places, he physically cannot get any negative points, which is so tasty considering he's at 7.8 million. Got to be careful of Logan Sargent because he could fall behind. I'm expecting him to get negative points as well coming into tomorrow's sprint race. And then even though I have just said to be careful of drivers around that zone, Alpine overall look like a great pair of drivers to have in your F1 fantasy teams as the cheap drivers. I really do think Gasly is the best option right now as a cheap driver, 9.6 million. If he can just stick around the top 10 for this entire race weekend and get a few race overtake points, potentially a position gained point if someone else crashes out, then you are really sitting pretty. Then massively steer clear of Aston Martin drivers of Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso. They look like they don't have any pace again this weekend. I don't expect them to overtake anyone further up the grid. So realistically, they're not worth it, especially as them as a constructor as well. Do not have them as a constructor. Then if you go for a second premium driver build team, the best bets still are Verstappen, Norris 2 times with the Verstappen on your team if you can afford that. However, if you can't afford that, then it's Hamilton versus Piastri. Now, the safe bet is Piastri, as he's in the McLaren that looks like the second/first fastest car if you take out the Verstappen effect. However, we know Hamilton's been doing this the last few weekends, bar Spain, because he actually had a decent qualifying there, where he'll qualify lower and make it up in race overtake positions, which is very good, again, for a sprint race weekend, especially in Austria, where you can get overtakes done. So Hamilton is the riskier option. However, at the end of the day, you're not going to be 2-timesing either of Piastri or Hamilton, so you could risk it for Hamilton, but my safe bet is Piastri as the second best driver for now. And then another driver you need to be careful, cheap driver wise, is Kevin Magnussen. Obviously, he started 11th, and if, again, in the sprint race, he just sticks there, it won't be many points. He could easily drop a few positions. And then in the qualifying, if he does this again in the race, he's not going to get a lot of positions as well. So I really do think Kevin Magnussen, although he normally pulls it out of the bag, so I would still say he's a good option. doesn't look as good as the Alpines, he doesn't look as good as Zhou, and he doesn't look as good as Tsunoda. And then, like I said, I'll talk about the 2 teams I'm looking for this weekend, and these will definitely be one of the teams I go for going into the team lock for anyone who doesn't watch the stream deadline. Now, this is probably the team I'm going to go for, which is the 1 premium driver build with Norris, Gasly, Tsunoda, Zhou, Sargent with Red Bull and McLaren. I could have, if I had free transfers, gone for someone better than Sargent. However, we just have to live and learn because I've only got 2 free transfers. However, like I said, Red Bull, especially on a sprint race weekend, it looks like they're going to run away with it on points wise, and it doesn't look like Ferrari's worth it, because let's say Piastri gets to around 30 to 40 points. I think the gap between a Gasly to a Piastri, which will be about 20-ish points, will be less than the gap from Red Bull to Ferrari. So I do really think it is worth bringing in Red Bull as a constructor this weekend. However, the other option I could do, if I change my mind and keep with the 2nd premium driver build, would be Norris, Piastri, Tsunoda, Zhou, Sargent with Mercedes and Ferrari. Then chip-wise, we're going to have a look at my updated Limitless team. This is how it looks. We've got Verstappen, Norris, Piastri, Russell, Hamilton, Red Bull, McLaren. So basically, get rid of Leclerc, bring in Russell. That is finalised what the Limitless team will look like. And then for extra DRS, the same thing applied. If you have Verstappen and Norris 3 times, Verstappen 2 times. And then the only other teams I would do extra DRS with, which has stayed similar, is a Norris build with either Hamilton or Piastri as the 2nd driver. Of course, with Norris with the 3 times and Piastri with the 2 times. And that is about the summary of everything you need to know before the team deadline. So of course, I'll talk about more of this in the live stream because there'll be more to talk about. This is basically the gist of all of the summary points. However, I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all later for another F1/F1 Fantasy video. Bye bye.